When the guns finally fell silent in May 1945, Berlin lay in ruins. More than 80% of the city's center was destroyed, and smoke still rose from smoldering buildings. Streets were mountains of rubble, lined with skeletons of what were once homes and theaters. The smell of dust, fire, and decay hung over the city like a permanent fog. Those who survived emerged from basements and bunkers into a world they barely recognized. Everywhere, silence reigned, broken only by footsteps crunching over debris. The city's once proud skyline now resembled a graveyard of broken stone and steel. In this wasteland, 3.5 million Berliners faced the same question. How do you begin again? Water, food, and power were scarce, and disease spread rapidly. People scavenged bricks and coal from ruins to survive the nights. The war was over, but the battle for survival had just begun. Berlin had to rebuild itself by hand, brick by brick. When men were gone, dead, missing, or prisoners, it was women who took up the shovels. They became known as the Trümmerfrauen, the rubble women, armed with nothing but gloves, hammers, and courage. They began clearing the city. They formed human chains, passing bricks hand to hand, cleaning each for reuse. Every swing of their pickaxe was an act of defiance against despair. These women rebuilt walls, bridges, and hope, piece by piece. Some carried babies on their backs as they worked under the summer sun. The Allies encouraged their work, photographing them as symbols of rebirth. But behind every smiling photo was exhaustion and hunger. For many, the work wasn't patriotic, it was survival. The rubble women turned ruins into foundations for a new beginning. Berlin was reborn from the hands of its mothers and widows. With no roofs left standing, Berliners made homes wherever they could. Basements became bedrooms, train cars became shelters, and ruins became dwellings. People patched holes in walls with wood, blankets, or even old propaganda posters. Families huddled around makeshift stoves built from tin cans and pipes. Every bit of glass, wire, or cloth was reused, recycled, reimagined. The nights were long and cold, especially during the winter of 1946. Windows were stuffed with rags to block wind, and doors were shared among neighbors. Yet, there was a strange sense of unity among survivors. Children played among ruins, their laughter echoing through broken streets. The skyline was dark, but candles and fires flickered from shattered windows. People called it life among the ruins, and somehow it continued. Berliners refused to vanish. They adapted, rebuilt, endured. As the dust settled, Berlin was split into four occupation zones. The Americans, British, French, and Soviets each claimed a sector of the city. What had once been one capital was now divided by ideology and suspicion. Checkpoints appeared on streets where neighbors once shared coffee. The Soviets controlled the East, while the Western Allies rebuilt the West. Posters and banners of Stalin, Churchill, and Truman marked the new boundaries. Citizens learned to carry papers at all times to cross between zones. Propaganda flooded every wall. Freedom versus socialism, West versus East. Families found themselves separated by lines drawn on old maps. The unity of survival slowly gave way to the politics of the Cold War. In the ruins, a new kind of tension was born, one of fear and mistrust. Berlin was no longer just broken, it was divided. By 1946, the city faced another enemy: starvation. Food rations were barely enough to keep families alive. Bread, potatoes, and powdered milk became priceless commodities. The black market, or Schwarzmarkt, thrived in the backstreets and ruins. Cigarettes replaced money. One pack could buy a week's worth of food. Soviet and American rations were traded secretly at night. People exchanged jewelry for bread and coats for flour. Authorities tried to control the chaos, but corruption spread everywhere. Children became runners, carrying goods between sectors unseen. Even hunger couldn't destroy Berlin's will to adapt. In this shadow economy, survival meant bending every rule. The war was over, but desperation still ruled the streets. As prisoners of war began returning, families searched for each other. Rail stations filled with tearful reunions and heartbreaking absences. Mothers carried photos of sons, Wives asked soldiers for any word of husbands. Walls and bulletin boards became covered with search notices. Every name was a hope. Every silence a wound that never healed. Children orphaned by war roamed the city in search of familiar faces. Refugees from the east added to the city's swelling chaos. Trains brought both the living and the memories of the dead. Reunion and loss became daily realities of post-war Berlin. For many, the hardest part was realizing that home was gone. Love had survived, but it no longer had walls to live in. Berlin became a city of ghosts and survivors learning to coexist. Amid the ruins, children invented their own games and worlds. They played war among bombed-out buildings, using helmets as toys. They scavenged metal, bottles, and rations to trade for food. Schools were gone, so learning happened in basements or open lots. Teachers wrote lessons on broken blackboards salvaged from ruins. These children were called the Trümmerkinder, rubble children. Many had no fathers and few had enough to eat. Yet their laughter echoed through the hollow shells of the city. Their resilience became Berlin's heartbeat during its hardest years. American soldiers sometimes shared candy or chewing gum. Those small gestures became symbols of hope. In a starving world, even in destruction, childhood found a way to survive. By 1947, Berlin had become the nerve center of a new global tension. Espionage, propaganda, and politics began replacing gunfire. Each side watched the other through spies, newspapers, and informants. Posters declared promises of peace, but everyone expected conflict. People whispered carefully, aware of hidden ears in every crowd. The Soviets tightened control in the east with secret police patrols. The western zones pushed democracy, radio, and open markets. Berliners found themselves living between two worlds: capitalism and communism. Even neighbors began to distrust one another. Checkpoint soldiers smiled by day and interrogated by night. The city that once symbolized war now became the front line of peace. Berlin was both divided and indispensable to the world's balance. In 1948, the Soviets blockaded West Berlin, cutting off food and supplies. The Western Allies responded with one of history's greatest rescue missions. Planes began landing every few minutes, carrying food, coal, and medicine. It was called the Berlin Airlift, Die Luftbrücke, the air bridge. American and British pilots flew day and night, risking their lives to keep the city alive. Children cheered as candy bombers dropped sweets on tiny parachutes. Tempelhof Airport became a symbol of defiance and unity. Over 170,000 flights delivered more than 2 million tons of supplies. The blockade lasted 11 months, but it failed to break Berlin's spirit. When the planes stopped, people stood in the streets and wept with pride. The airlift proved that humanity could rise above politics. In the sky above rubble, hope learned to fly again. After the airlift, Berliners began rebuilding with new determination. Rubble was turned into roads, bricks into homes, and ruins into gardens. Volunteers cleared streets and planted flowers where bombs had fallen. The sound of hammers and laughter slowly replaced the echoes of war. Reconstruction wasn't just physical, it was emotional. Cafes reopened, cinemas flickered again, and music returned to dance halls. The people who had once fought for bread now dreamed of futures. Old monuments were restored as symbols of endurance, not empire. Artists and poets captured the pain and pride of rebirth. Every repaired window reflected resilience and renewal. Berlin's soul, once buried under ruins, began to shine again. The city was still divided, but it was alive. By the early 1950s, two Berlins began to emerge. In the West, American aid brought food, jobs, and rebuilding projects. In the East, Soviet influence shaped life through strict control and ideology. New flags, schools, and street names appeared overnight. People on both sides still crossed freely, but tensions grew. The West sparkled with neon lights and jazz clubs. The East emphasized equality and socialist pride. Families often argued over which side had the better future. Propaganda painted both halves as true Germany. Berliners learned to live between hope and fear. No wall had been built yet, but the divide was already real. The heart of Germany was beating into different rhythms. Berlin's post-war years created a unique culture of endurance. Music, art, and cabaret rose again amid destruction. Pain became inspiration, and scarcity became creativity. Artists painted on walls made from salvaged plaster. Writers chronicled hunger, love, and irony in every broken street. Fashion returned through reused fabric and military coats. Cafes became gathering spots for dreamers, refugees, and philosophers. People debated politics over thin coffee and thicker courage. Berlin learned to laugh at itself again. It was dark humor, but it healed. The city's resilience became its new identity. Berlin wasn't glamorous, but it was real and alive. In its broken beauty, it found strength. Even among the rubble, love bloomed quietly. Couples met in bombed-out dance halls, holding hands by candlelight. Soldiers and civilians found brief peace in shared moments. Weddings were held in ruined churches without roofs. Rings were made from melted metal or wire found in debris. Romance became rebellion, a way to prove life still mattered. Letters traveled across occupation lines, filled with longing and uncertainty. Every embrace was an act of hope against despair. Many families started anew, raising children in improvised homes. For Berliners, love wasn't luxury, it was survival. It kept the city's heart beating through hunger and hardship. In every ruin, there was still warmth. By 1955, Berlin had changed, but its scars remained. Rebuilt streets stood beside ruins that refused to fall. New buildings rose where ashes once lay. Symbols of endurance. Children born after the war played where bombs once fell. The city's spirit had survived fire, hunger, and division. It was proof that a people can rebuild not just walls, but hearts. The memory of loss remained in every stone and every silence. But Berlin's identity was no longer tragedy, it was triumph. The rubble had shaped a generation strong and unbreakable. From ashes, the city forged courage and compassion. Berlin wasn't finished, it was just beginning again. The world watched, inspired by its rebirth. The decade after 1945 defined Berlin's soul forever. It taught that destruction can breed strength, and despair can spark unity. The rubble women, the children, the hungry, and the hopeful each rebuilt history. Every brick they lifted became a testament to survival. Berlin became a symbol not just of war, but of rebirth. Its story echoed around the world. No ruin is too deep for hope. The scars remained visible, but they became part of its beauty. Tourists now walk where silence once ruled. Modern Berlin stands proud, built on lessons of the past. The spirit of 1945 still lives in its streets and people. It reminds us that even from dust, life can rise again. Berlin didn't just survive, it was reborn.